A classy Latina woman just leaving the immigration gate was suddenly detained by two police officers without any clear explanation, without no reasonable reason. They looked at her suspiciously. Barely a few seconds later, among the murmurs of the crowd, the woman was forced to turn around, her hand trapped in cold handcuffs. Sighs of astonishment resonated among the surrounding passengers. Some took out their phones to record this unfair scene. Insulting words came out of the mouths of the two police officers. "Who do you think you're a con artist, sophisticated? Don't play dumb. We have received a report of a Latina woman suspicious. You fit the description perfectly, description." But what they didn't know was that the woman, the one they had just insulted, was not a criminal. She was not a fugitive, but rather was someone with the power to bring these two police officers before the law. They had just made the biggest mistake of their careers, and they will pay the price. And what will be the end of those who abuse of power? Let's get into today's story about the San Diego International Airport. It is always crowded, especially in the immigration area for flights international. The constant flow of people, the mix of announcements over the loudspeakers, the noise of the suitcases on the floor, and the conversations in multiple languages, they create a characteristically busy. At the arrivals gate, the passengers were leaving after complete the immigration procedures. Among the crowd, a woman stood out. Latina Elena Ramírez, 41 years old, is one of the most prominent federal prosecutors in the U.S. justice system, has more than 15 years of experience handling important cases, especially those that involve financial crimes and high-level corruption level. Elena is tall and has long black hair and an angular face that clearly shows sharpness and intelligence. You wear a luxurious suit that exudes power and professionalism. In her hand, Elena carries a small black suitcase, while on her shoulder carries a Louis Vuitton bag, an accessory that clearly shows the class of a successful woman. After a week-long business trip week to London, where he attended a legal conference on crimes, international financial crimes, Elena just wanted to get home and rest, was familiar with the hustle and bustle of San Diego Airport. But this time I had no idea that I was about to face an unimaginable situation. On the other side of the immigration area, Michael Carter and James Reynolds, two airport security officers. They were side by side scanning the crowd. Both were white police officers, around 40 years old, with years of experience in the field. But the experience did not equate to progressive thinking. They were both used to making judgments based on notions, preconceived notions, instead of solid evidence. When a security guard approached, whispering a few words with a tense expression, both men paid immediate attention, announced that there was a Latina woman, suspicious, who had just entered the country from London and could be involved in some illegal activity. There was no other specific description, a name, no apparent reason, just a Latina woman. Michael looked at James, and they both searched among the crowd. They soon spotted Elena, a well-dressed and confident Latina woman who stood out from the rest of the passengers for them. It was a suspicious sight. A successful-looking Latina woman for them. That was not normal. James slightly curved his lips and said softly, "There it is. It seems like has money, but who knows where it comes from, that money comes from." Michael nodded his eyes, showing his prejudice. Without checking further, without verifying the source of the report, the two walked quickly towards Elena, ready to conduct an interrogation. Elena was detained when she was leaving the area. Customs stop. "Ma'am!" sounded the sharp voice of Michael behind her. Elena frowned but didn't seem surprised. As a Latina woman in the legal system, American legal system was not unfamiliar with scrutiny and being treated in a different. But this time I didn't expect to be targeted at the airport simply because of his color of his skin. He turned around. Slowly, two police officers were in front, their cold eyes, their postures full of the authority of men who believed that they had all the power in their hands. "What is happening?" Elena asked, her voice calm but authoritative. Calm but authoritative. Michael did not respond immediately. changed his eyes quickly to her traveled, stopping at the designer handbag designer, the luxurious suit, as if those things made him even more suspicious. "We need you to show us your identification," said James, his tone devoid of any sympathy. Elena raised an eyebrow, although she was beginning to feel uncomfortable. She knew that these security checks were something normal, but the way these two were acting made it clear that they were not just following the procedure. And what is their reason? Michael crossed his arms, his hard expression. "We have a report of a suspicious Latina woman who just entered the country, fits the description." A cold smile crossed Elena's lips. Elena's description. And what would that be? Description. Apart from being a woman Latina, James seemed a bit embarrassed, but quickly regained his composure. "We are just doing our job. If you have nothing to hide, cooperate." Statement made Elena's blood boil. "You have heard too many excuses." Similar. Phrases like, "I just do my work and I only follow orders used to cover up behaviors discriminatory." Slowly took her passport out of her bag, keeping her gaze steady as he was handing it over. "Okay? Then check it." Michael took the Elena's passport, but instead of examining it carefully, he just took a glance at the cover without bothering. To open it to see the information inside, Interior James was standing next to him with crossed arms, eyes full of suspicion as, "If I were facing a dangerous criminal American citizen?" asked Michael in a skeptical tone. Elena crossed her arms, her eyes never leaving them. "Yes. And I think that's clear in my passport." Michael smiled disdainfully, glancing through the pages without really reading the information. Raised her gaze, squinting her eyes. What was the purpose of her trip to London? Trip to London. Elena kept her voice, calm business. James intervened, his dry voice. "In what field?" Michael mocked straight. "And what exactly does he do?" Elena slightly tilted her head. Her sharp eyes, not losing the mockery in their voices, knew exactly what they were trying to make her feel cornered to find some suspicious sign. "I am a federal prosecutor," he replied, slowly emphasizing each word. For a fraction of a second, the two police officers looked at each other, but then instead of stopping, James burst into laughter. A laugh that was half mockery, half challenge. "A federal prosecutor? That's funny. If someone like you were a federal prosecutor too, would be the president? The president of the United States?" Michael shook his head. "That doesn't sound convincing, ma'am." A federal prosecutor under suspicion at Airport. Elena felt a wave of wanting to run down her spine. I couldn't believe that even after reveal her identity, she was still being treated like a liar. "If you two doubt me, check my information right now in the system to that they have access, right?" But Michael ignored the suggestion. "We have reason to believe that it may be transporting contraband or using a false identity." The words cut through the air like a knife sharp. A stifling silence fell. Elena narrowed her eyes, feeling the anger rising within her. What are you basing that conclusion on? Do you have any evidence?" James shrugged, smiling coldly. "We don't need evidence. We're just doing our job." The words, "we were just doing our job," resonated in Elena's head like a warning bell. He had heard it too many times in his career. Those who abuse their power they always found a way to cover up their actions with that phrase, "the people." Around began to realize some. Passengers slowed down. Turning to look with curious eyes, a few took out their phones recording videos. Insolence. They said nothing but their eyes. They said it all indignation. But no one dared to intervene. Elena took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "You two are abusing. You're powered unless you have a good reason. I have right to leave." But James stepped forward, his hard face. No, you don't. Right to do anything." Before Elena could react, Michael grabbed her arm and pulled her back. Turn around. Elena was stunned. "What are you doing?" "You said," her voice starting, losing his usual calm. James lowered the hand, pulling the handcuffs from his belt, while Michael tightened his grip on. "Elena's hands are being held. For investigation. Investigation about What reasons do we have to believe that she is not? Is being sincere about her identity? We will conduct a more thorough verification. Thorough at the checkpoint. Security. They are exceeding their authority only. We are fulfilling our duty. Those words were the last straw, the glass. Elena couldn't believe that in the middle of an international airport, among hundreds of people, she, a federal prosecutor, a person who fought for justice, was being treated like a criminal just because of the color of her skin. Cold handcuffs tightened around her wrists. All eyes were on her. The phones kept recording every moment of this injustice, but no one took a step forward. No one intervened. She gritted her teeth, trying not to show the anger that was growing inside her, but the pain in her eyes was clear. Elena walked with her wrists handcuffed, each step heavier than the last. Step heavier than the last. The two police escorted her through the cold corridors of San Diego Airport. Diego towards the security interrogation area. Security. The passengers around her watched with mixed expressions, some supporters, some outraged, but the majority remained silent. Some they continued recording, hoping that the video would tell the truth. Elena said nothing on the way. She kept her impassive face, but inside a storm of rage was unleashing. Had fought for justice for her entire career, but now she herself has become a victim of a system riddled with prejudice and abuse. The interrogation room in which he was placed was small, with gray walls and cold fluorescent lighting. A metal table was in the middle, in front of two rigid chairs. James roughly removed the handcuffs from Elena and he pushed her to the chair. Stay still here. Don't even think about doing something stupid," she warned. Elena crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes never leaving him. "I want to call to the federal prosecutor's office inmediatamente." Michael laughed. "Oh, really? Do you think we're going to let you call just because you say you're a federal prosecutor?" Elena tilted her head, her voice cold. "No, I stated it. It's the truth. And if you don't verify quickly my identity, they will regret." James laughed, but there was a tense quality in his laughter. He left the room, while Michael remained there with his arms crossed, watching Elena Asif. She were a cornered prey. She remained still in silence, but her eyes showed no signs of hesitation. Knew that any action I took could be used against him, also knew that the truth would soon be revealed. And when that happened, these two police officers would not be able to escape the consequences. A few minutes later, the door opened. An airport security officer, he entered carrying a file in his hand. He was in his early 40s. He had with short hair, a clean face, and most importantly, important. He seemed more professional than the other two police officers. The moment he saw Elena, his look changed completely. A look of panic crossed her face. She stopped, looked at the file in his hand, then looked back to Elena. "What the hell is going on here?" asked, her voice full of tension. Michael shrugged, his voice indifferent. "We are holding her for questioning. Any problem?" The security guard looked at Michael, then turned towards Elena, looking confused. "Excuse me, are you the district attorney?" "District attorney? Elena Ramírez." Elena looked at him, nodding slowly. "Yes, and I demand that you verify my identity immediately." The security guard swallowed hard, quickly took out his phone and left the room. A few minutes later, hurried footsteps were heard. Hurried footsteps outside. Shortly after the door of the room was opened with force, two senior officers entered, their solemn faces, one of them who seemed to be Michael's, and James approached the table and placed his hands on the cold metal surface and looked at the two police officers who were there, frozen. "You know what you just did?" His voice was cold and full of rage. Michael and James blinked still, apparently not understanding what was happening. The person they just handcuffed and humiliate in the middle of the airport is Elena Ramírez, a federal prosecutor, one of the most powerful people in the system, of the U.S. justice system. Michael's face turned pale, instantly. James wasn't getting better. He stammered, his eyes showing panic. What, Michael?" took a step back, she is really a federal. Prosecutor Elena stood up slowly, straightened her suit, and looked directly at the two policemen with a sharp gaze. The anger that had erupted before, but instead a cold, calm butterifying, approached Michael and James, keeping enough distance so that they could feel her pressure. "You two, you just made the biggest mistake of your careers." Her words were not strong, but each word was like a knife stabbing directly into the pride of both police officers. A deadly silence fell over the room. Michael and James didn't dare to say another word. They knew that things were beyond their control. Within the hours following Elena left the interrogation room, the incident exploded on social media. Like a wildfire, videos taken by passengers at the San Diego airport were posted on Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, quickly accumulating millions of views. The footage shows Elena handcuffed in front to hundreds of people, her face etched with anger and pain, while two police officers, whites, treat her with brutality and contempt. Soon the main media outlets' communication found themselves caught up in the storm. The main news outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times picked up the story. Not only did they reproduce the video, but they also delved into the profile of Elena Ramírez, a brilliant prosecutor federal who has won numerous cases against large financial corporations and corrupt officials. Articles with shocking headlines flooded the internet. Federal prosecutor racially profiled by the police at San Diego airport, from the Washington Post, is really fair. The U.S. justice system, when even Latino prosecutors are notorious free from discrimination. The Guardian, flagrant abuse of power. Two San Diego airport police officers handcuffed a federal prosecutor for Harris NBC. Two police officers handcuffed a federal prosecutor for racism. The public outrage grew, and small protests began in San Diego, demanding justice for Elena and calling for a police reform official decision. Michael Carter and James Reynolds were immediately suspended pending result of the investigation. Only a week later, both were fired. They left the police station police officer in disgrace, without a word of defense from superiors or colleagues. Images of their dismissals appeared in the press, and soon it was discovered that Michael Carter had received previous complaints, of abuse of power, but never had been severely punished. Elena not only let the media handle the case, she understood that the true justice did not come from headlines, or public outrage had to come from the legal system. As a victim, Elena filed a lawsuit against the two police officers and the San Diego Police Department for violate their civil rights. Under the law, federal civil rights, the lawsuit alleges that Michael and James did not. They not only abused their power, but they were also racially motivated, deciding to detain her based only on the color of her skin without no justification. The Office of U.S. Attorney quickly took charge of the case, announcing that Michael Carter and James Reynolds would be charged in federal court of two serious crimes: abuse of power in law enforcement and violation of civil rights under the Constitution of the United States. If they were convicted, they could face years of imprisonment. Just a few days ago, Michael and James were arrogant cops who thought they could treat a Latina woman with impunity, but now they were accused of facing one of the most formidable women of America, the woman who once insulted and humiliated in the middle of an airport, Elena Ramírez, with her entire presence calm but authoritative. She was ready to bring them to justice. The trial of Michael Carter and James Reynolds took place under the watchful gaze of the public and the media. The federal court in San Diego became the center of attention of all of the United States when the two police officers were brought to trial for abuse of power and violation of rights. Civilians, hundreds of people, gathered outside from the courthouse holding signs demanding justice for Elena Ramírez. Many media outlets were present, recording live and updating every development in the trial. Millions of people across the United States followed the event on television and social media. Inside the courtroom, the jury of 12 members sat solemnly, listening to the lawyers argue. The judge was a prominent figure in the judicial system, known for its harsh sentences in cases of abuse of power. By the law enforcement forces, prosecutors presented evidence overwhelming in court. The video footage from the airport in San Diego took center stage. A large screen in the courtroom court showed Michael and James blocking Elena's path without cause fair, repeatedly treating her inoffensively, and finally handcuffing her in front to hundreds of spectators. Several passenger witnesses present at the airport that day were summoned to declare. A white man stood up, his voice filled with indignation. "I saw everything from the beginning. There was no reason for them to stop her other than she was a well-dressed Latina woman. They had no evidence, no reason specific, just prejudice." Another middle-aged woman who recorded the video on her phone even cried while recounting what she witnessed. "I felt terrible. She wasn't resisting. She didn't do anything wrong, and yet, however, they handcuffed her as if she were a criminal. If they can do that to a federal prosecutor, what happens to us, the common people?" The courtroom waist tensed when Michael and James's defense attorneys tried to argue that they were simply following the standard security procedures, but the sharp questioning by the prosecutor quickly refuted that argument. What security procedure allows them handcuff a person just because they have a different skin color than yours? If she were a white woman dressed in elegance, would they have behaved the same way? Same way Michael and James lowered their head, unable to respond after several days of deliberation. The jury, it took less than 3 hours to reach a guilty verdict. Michael Carter and James Reynolds were sentenced to 4 years in prison for abuse of power and racial discrimination under the federal law. There was a tense silence in the courtroom when the judge announced the verdict. Michael, always confident and arrogant, now he had no color in his face. He shook her head, unable to believe what was happening. James lowered his head as if he had renounced all hope. Outside the courthouse, cheers rang out when the verdict was announced. Hundreds of people applauded and celebrated as if this were not just a victory for Elena Ramírez, but a victory for justice after the trial ended. Elena stood at the podium outside the courthouse, where dozens of reporters were waiting for the cameras. They were focused on her. Capturing the momentous moment, looked directly at the crowd with his eyes strong and full of authority. "Today we have demonstrated that no one is above the law, not even those in charge of enforcing it. I am not the first person to be discriminated against, and sadly, I won't be the last. But today, we send a clear message. Anyone who uses their badge to abuse of their power to oppress others, due the color of their skin, will be held accountable. Justice is not a privilege. Justice is a right, and we must continue fighting to protect it." The crowd erupted in applause. Elena's words quickly went viral, becoming a powerful statement about equality and anti-racism in the legal system. Ella Nash descended the courthouse steps, firm and prudent. The other side, Michael and James, were escorted to the police car. Their faces were dark, their eyes down to the ground, avoiding the cameras of dozens of reporters. The car doors closed, car drove away, taking them to a place that they never thought they would end up in, a federal prison. Meanwhile, Elena Ramírez, the woman who was humiliated at the airport because of the color of her skin, left the courthouse with his head held high because he fought. And thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click on like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next significant stories, because tomorrow we will have another significant story for you.